2 years now. Greatest thing that happened. This is before the round table. Um, I was honored to be asked to be the first speaker at the Cape Fear Civil War Roundtable upon its founding in the fall of 1994. Now, you have to remember that Ken Burns' Civil War documentary had been released just 4 years earlier. And there was a great deal of excitement about the Civil War, and particularly Civil War military history, which seems to be so absent in today's world. So there was a coming together of like-minded people who shared an interest in the Civil War. In a way, I think it was almost like the last hurrah for those of us who grew up during the Civil War centennial. We were kids again. We were back to 1960, 61 when the Civil War was not just commemorated, but it was celebrated as a milestone era in our nation's history. The war preserved the Union, and it freed, of course, 4 million enslaved African Americans. In the end, though, growing up in the South, the South shall rise again, and my father used to give me Confederate money and say, hang on to this, boy, the rebels are coming back. In the end, the right side won. And we were no longer the United States are, but the United States is. And to be a part of the very beginning of the round table was quite memorable. And I stopped and spoke with 2 other historic presidents tonight, David and Bob, and then Bill, and asked who amongst us were members as early as 1994. Me and Bob.
95.
95?
Yeah, probably January 95.
Okay, so as the first speaker, I was not living in Wilmington at the time. I returned the following summer. Got the job teaching at UNCW, but I joined after that first meeting. But I was not a founding member. I just was the first speaker, but an early member, and then Bob. And Mike Budashevsky and his wife Karen moved here in 1997 and became members that year. Is that right? Yeah. And then Mike was my vice president when I was the second president after 6 years. So George Slayton sort of established a president as president for a 6-year tenure. So George served from 1994 to 2000. I served from 2000 to 2006. Mike, my vice president. And then David Norris served, I think, for 4 years. Something like that. And then Bob came along and picked up the slack and served for 8 years or 18 years or whatever it was. And then Bill.
9 years, 7 months.
4 days, 26 hours. And then Bill has served for 6 years, and now we have the Ruski woman for
I'll be like Putin. I'll just be here forever.
Last election is happening.
Leave my bourbon cherries alone.
Too late for that.
Chris,
Yes.
what did you talk about?
Lo and behold, surprise, surprise, I spoke in the Wilmington campaign. I just finished my dissertation, and so of course it was fresh on my mind. And that same, no, it was the spring, the fall before. There was the Congress of Civil War Roundtables run by Jerry Russell that met in Wilmington. And it was a very fateful weekend because Mark Bradley, who you all know, wrote that great book on Bentonville, Last Stand in the Carolinas, was there. Ed Mars was the keynote speaker that weekend. This was an annual meeting of Congress, of Civil War Roundtables from across the country. And Ted Savas was there, who was just starting Savas Campbell then, now Savas Bates Publishing. And he published Wilmington Campaign and Mark Bradley's Last Stand in the Carolinas. And it did extremely well with them. So I spoke on the Wilmington Campaign. And that was so long ago that one of the characters in my book was Lieutenant Colonel John Douglas Taylor of the 36th North Carolina, who served at Fort Fisher, Fort Anderson, lost an arm at Bentonville, so badly wounded he had to have it amputated. They put him into a buckboard wagon on his way to Raleigh, and it was so bumpy that he got out of the wagon and got on horseback and rode the rest of the way in right after having his arm amputated. But two of his grandsons were at my presentation, John Douglas Taylor III and Alan Strange. So there were still, people who vividly remember people who fought during the Civil War. So that was pretty neat. The other thing I remember is that it was raining cats and dogs that night. I parked in the King Hall parking lot, and I only had to run about 100 feet. By the time I got into the hall, I was soaking wet, and so was everyone else. But still, I think there were 71 people showed up that night. It was great. And from those humble beginnings, we have this wonderful institution 30 years later. Think about that. That's absolutely incredible. So congratulations to y'all. It's been a great run, and keep the run going. Okay? So well done. Now, without further ado, I am going to turn it over to David Norris, the third president of the Cape Fear Roundtable. So here's David.
Thank you all for having me here tonight. I guess listening to Chris talk and just everybody tonight, thinking about the passage of time. I remember I was probably about second grade. My dad had an 1865 Indian head penny, and he showed it to me. And I remember saying, wow, that's 99 years old. And I thought, well, the next year would be the 100th anniversary, the end of the Civil War and the Lincoln assassination. I was just starting to learn about all this stuff. And I still think of the Civil War as 100 years ago, but 100 years ago, it's silent movies and airplanes and prohibition and Victrolas, and so I have to kind of do some math before I start thinking about, what year this is. But looking back at our 30 years, I think one of the really important things that everyone's done here with the Civil War Roundtable, I suppose we've had a couple of hundred authors, historians come in over that time. And it's really important to let them know that their work is important. That's whether some of them come from an academic background, and some work in, say, the park system or museums, and some are independent historians, and some of them they kind of picked up an idea, researched it, and ran with it, and did a book and a body of research. And everybody to be here to listen, it's been really good to support them. And I think it's also what the membership has done. Everybody studying the Civil War, rather studying it in general to get a background on it, but then pursuing our own interests. I think with anything with North Carolina that happened in it or involved North Carolinians, and the blockade, Wilmington and Weldon Railroad, the Civil War medicine, newspapers, anything, of course, photographs, because I was an art major, any kind of photographs or paintings, pictorial material. And I think all y'all, everybody kind of has maybe their own specialty, something they're really interested in. And I think this is really important. I think it's great. And then when you find new things, share them, let other people know. And our interest is going to run out from the Civil War to other things. I know we're talking, people here tonight, we were talking about like World War II stuff came up, and then we talk about our hometowns, and that's easy enough to lead into local history. But all this stuff's important. But it's great to we have all these people here to care about history. We can share that with each other and encourage each other in our research and our work. It could be as little as just if you find out something really cool, let somebody know, especially if they're interested in it. And I hope that the Civil War Roundtable, and we'll have another 30 years plus of just doing just that. Well, thank y'all for everything you've done.
You got to introduce Bob.
Oh yeah, I'm Bob. Yes. Here's someone someone who needs no introduction. Bob Cook.
Well, Mike Podashevsky, I'm up, I'm talking. Come on, listen. I was not a founding member of the Roundtable, as I mentioned. I moved here in 1994, and January '95, I think I attended the first meeting. George Slayton, obviously, was the founder, amongst others.
They want you to get over.
They want you to
there.
get
Standing in the door.
There you go.
That's it, right there. Perfect.
Okay, divided that way. Okay. And once again, they make me speak after Chris Fonville.
What does that mean?
A friend of mine a long time ago told me an organization, club, association is kind of like a living organism. It's born, and in this case, it was born from an idea from George Slayton and others. It grows, it attracts members, it matures. Members are the lifeblood of any organization, and I'll say this as well while I can think of it. If the president is the head of the organization, members are the lifeblood, but it's the steering committees that are the backbone of the organization. And I've got to give kudos to the steering committee that was there when I was president, because they took up a lot of the work. I mean, where are we going to meet tonight? Oh, we can't meet here. We've got to change the location. Line up the speakers. Trip guys, setting a trip up to Gettysburg or wherever. They took a lot of the load off me. Prior to becoming president, though, and by the way I became president is I happened to be standing up and I was handing out things to the members while Chris was giving a talk and either collecting something or giving something out. And Chris said, "I nominate Bob Cook to be president." And by acclamation, I became president. I was only vice president now. But prior to that, I did the newsletter for several years. And I was just thinking back about what that involved. And Matt, I know you doing the newsletter now, but back then I would type out a 4 to 6 page newsletter. And I was lucky in that I was doing a lot of research on the side. So I had a lot of stories I could put in the newsletters, local stories, mainly local stories. And as one writer said, I read about one writer some time ago, he said, "Thank God for local historians, because they really do the research that these other historians build on." In any event, I had stories that I could put in there. So I would type out the 4 to 6 page newsletter, print it out, take it to Alpha Graphics, and they would run off 150 copies because we were mailing copies out to other or roundtables as well. But then I would bring it across the river to international mailers, and they would send it out. They were located just about where I-140 is now. They're gone now. But I was thinking about it, and I was president, I think, when we went to the digital age, and we put it online, and I said, "Thank goodness." But that was a load off my shoulders as well. But talking about organizations as living organisms, I got away from that a little bit, but organizations age as they take in new members and all, but eventually people move away, they lose interest, or they pass on, and many organizations die. Well, as I look around, I see some faces that I recognize, but I see a lot of new faces, and I know that this organization is going to be around for another 30 years at least. It's got to be. And I can go on and on a couple other things, but they don't relate to the roundtable. So no. Your book, The Wilmington Campaign, The Last Rays of Departing Hope. I used to work down at Fort Fisher, the state historic site. Used to be a tour guide down there. And one day a young lady came up to me and said, "How can I find out what's the best way to learn about the Cape Fear area quickly?" And I said, "You get yourself 2 books. You get yourself Chris Fonville's Departing Rays, and you get James Sprunt's Chronicles of the Cape Fear River. And then take a walk through Oakdale Cemetery. And that stuff will just jump out at you." And that, as a matter of fact, on Saturdays or Sundays, I had a boxer, and I would walk my dog in Oakdale, and I let the dog take the lead. And invariably, she led me to somebody interesting. I mean, it was crazy. That's the way it happened. I had written out a little thing here. My talk about organisms or about organizations and how they thrive and all. And at the end of it, it said, and let's have a chant for the Cape Fear Civil War Roundtable. And I said, no, we better not. But then I heard you all earlier on. Yeah! You want to hear a chant for the Civil War Roundtable?
Yes.
Sure.
Let's hear it for the Civil War Roundtable. Cape Fear Civil War Roundtable. Yeah!
Introduce Bill.
I'm Bill.
Speaker.
Thanks for that introduction.
Billy.
There's Bill.
All right. Let's see. All right. Everyone knows me. I think I don't need the introduction, but I want to first of all say that the last 6 years has been a great experience for me. I really love it, and you know, everything Yelena said, Chris, David, Bob, about the importance of history. I sign on to that. I think, you know, it's important now. I just went last weekend up to upstate New York in the Hudson Valley where I grew up. It was the 60th anniversary of high school graduation. And I grew up in a little county, a sparsely populated county on the west side of the Hudson River, Ulster County. And I didn't find out until probably 15, 20 years ago that the famous abolitionist Sojourner Truth was born as a slave in that county. She was not freed until the 1820s when slavery finally ended in New York State. It's very important. History is very important. It's important now. And I was always, you know, fascinated by it. I remember I had an 8th grade teacher, we were talking about it last weekend, who taught social studies, history. And I remember one time she was talking about the District of Columbia. And she said the District of Columbia is part of Maryland. And I said, well, weren't we taught that the district was independent? It was taken from the state of Maryland, and she said, eventually she agreed that I was right. She said, you'd rather be right than president, she said. And Henry Clay, what am I supposed to take from that? I thought we were supposed to admire Henry Clay. You know, that's what they said about Clay, that he never became president because he always wanted to be right. But I've always been fascinated by history, and then in the early 70s, with, you know, I'm a Vietnam veteran, served as a Marine, combat Marine in the Tet Offensive in 1968, and in 75, you know, the fall of Saigon, and I'm trying to make sense of it. And one of the things I did was I got into reading Lee's Lieutenants, and I read that voraciously. That, you know, right straight through almost, with a little bit of time out for work, trying to figure out, you know, how do these things happen, and how do we find ourselves, you know, so divided and so destructive at the same time. What's the precedent, you know? And the Civil War was the precedent. So I've always, this has been a great experience for me, and I really love it. And I want to thank you. And I'm not going to talk too much about the history of the Roundtable. I think you know, over the last 6 years, we faced a lot of challenges, and I think we overcame them. We overcame them well, and I thank everybody in this room. I think at one point or another over the last 6 years, I asked every one of you probably for some help, a favor. Can you do this for me? And, you know, without exception, people stepped forward and did it. And I feel really proud that we do have a great team to take over. We've got rules in place that are going to guide the organism's growth from here on out. And I have a lot of optimism for the future. I think we've got a fantastic team ready to guide and lead the roundtable. And thank you all very much.
Thank you all so very much for coming tonight, and thank you to each of our presidents and all the members of our team. You know, it takes all of us to keep this organization going. We appreciate your participation in any way that you care to provide us. If you prefer just coming to our meetings, if you'd rather keep up with us online, if driving is inconvenient for you at night, if you would like to participate with us in any way on field trips, interacting with our authors, or anything at all that you care to do, just let us know. We're a very friendly and accessible team. I promise you that there's no in group and an out group. It's all an in group. So come to us anytime. If you would like to help with an occasional project or a more consistent commitment, we would love to have you. But we appreciate seeing you all here tonight. Thank you for making the drive. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and we sure enjoyed seeing each and every one of you. Thank you. Thank you. That was